It's a privilege to introduce Jacqui. Jacqui is one of our associates, and some of you may have been diagnosed by Jacqui. Jacqui is a really crucial member of Axia in relation to occupational therapy, sensory integration, sensory sensitivities, motor coordination, the list goes on, and also has been very helpful to me and my family in relation to the dyspraxia that is prevalent throughout generations of our families, including helping you stand up at heavy metal concerts, eh, Cal?
Don't remind me.
So, without further ado, Jacqui, you're going to be talking to us about ageing, which as an ageing neurodivergent is really important. So we don't stop being neurodivergent when we get to 18. And it's important that we look at what goes on, that I think all the positives and maybe some of the challenges about ageing with neurodivergence. So Jacqui, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, if you could please press the button. So we're going to look at ageing in general, some of the assessment considerations that you might want to bear in mind when you're going through services, and also thinking about how those changes impact us in the things we want or need to do as we get older. Occupational well-being is really important, and being able to do the things that we want or need to do in a way that's meaningful to us is really important. And often people are held to neurotypical standards about what might be an appropriate level of functioning or what might be an appropriate special interest to hold, activity to carry out, and that understanding needs to be there from healthcare professionals, individuals who work in social care, across the board really. Please change, thank you. So most of the research and support is aimed at children and young people, as I'm sure any of you that have spent any time looking into these matters will agree. And we don't grow out of being neurodivergent. That's our neurotype, that's the way our sensory receptors work, the way our brains process information, so that is not going to change. But older people are really hardly ever considered through a neurodivergent lens. What we have is a lost generation of individuals, often people who are finding out because their grandchildren were diagnosed and then their children were diagnosed, or finding out as the demands of life have exceeded their capacity, that the masking and coping skills that they've have sort of been worn thin, and then are finding out in later life, but finding that there's no support that follows on from that. There's no understanding, because we're expecting to see maybe a young boy with ADHD or a young girl who's maybe very anxious and masking, but not these older, very competent, successful individuals. So occupational therapists think about a person's relationship with time, how they spend their time, how they progress through life, how they engage in meaningful occupations, and how that might change throughout the lifespan. So that's why I've chosen to speak about this topic today, because it's something that I think is really important. Please change. How are these conditions impacted? Have we missed out one? No, okay. So how are these occupations impacted? Occupations can be impacted in a way that they are running alongside other co-occurring conditions. So this could be things like menopause, arthritis. It could be any changes in your physical environment. Have you needed to downsize to a bungalow and it wasn't something that you wanted to do? How has that impacted your functioning, your well-being, the way that you feel? It could be that you've now moved to an area where you have to use lots of stairs, and does that impact your co-occurring hypermobility? Are you anxious because of dyspraxia about falling up the stairs or down the stairs? So does that make you not want to go out? How do all of these environmental aspects influence your ability to engage in those occupations? And when there are barriers to engagement, that impacts negatively our well-being, the way that we feel, the way that we interact with others. If we're also thinking about the environment, I think it's important to consider, particularly at the moment, the sort of the political sphere as well, the political environment. How does that impact you? How does any changes in people's view on autism or ADHD or dyspraxia impact you? Those cultural factors, those societal factors. Your environment is not just you know, the walls around you, it's the place that you live in society. So how is that impacting a lot of autistic individuals with ADHD, individuals who are dyspraxic at the moment? Feelings of injustice, feelings of maybe not being understood, that's going to have a real impact as well. And also things like medication. So anyone who lives slightly over the border in Wales will be accessing medication for free. Someone who lives in England will not. Someone might be able to have access to a new menopause drug if they live in a certain part of England but wouldn't get it somewhere else. So there's multiple factors about your environment that are going to impact the things that you're able to do. And those things will be important to consider as a neurodivergent person, because we can have unusual responses to medication. We can want to know the reason behind why a decision has been made. So it can be tricky for someone to say, you can have this for free in this area, but you can't have it. That sense of injustice and sort of not understanding the rationale can be quite tricky for someone who is neurodivergent. Please change. So I'm talking a lot about occupations and how they impacted. What are occupations? So occupations are anything that you want or need to do. It's not what you do for work, or although I know lots of people will have heard, you know, or will think of an occupation as a sort of policeman or nurse or whatever. But actually we tend to group them into sort of subsections of self-care, productivity and leisure. So your self-care could be things like making a meal or getting dressed. Your productivity could be education, taking care of grandchildren, or a work environment task. It could be anything to do with your career. And then your leisure is anything that you do that makes you feel good and re-energized, rested. So for lots of people here, that might be a special interest or an activity that helps us to self-regulate or self-soothe. And I think if we don't engage in those activities, it can have a real impact on us. If anyone's been stopped from doing something, maybe you broke a leg and couldn't do the thing you wanted to need to do, or you attended a group and the group shut down, the feelings that you have sort of emotionally about that, the other negative impacts that you might not consider are quite real. So occupation's really important, and there's a real link between occupational well-being and overall well-being. Please change, Elliot. Okay. So quickly, I wanted to think about the neurodivergent overlap. This is because there is such a huge overlap. We do see so often in assessments individuals who are showing traits of various different conditions, but that maybe just aren't quite at diagnostic threshold, or whose traits are better explained by something else. We will also see individuals who do meet the criteria and have actually numerous different neurodivergent conditions and have this really complex neurodivergent profile. So it's important to understand whether or not the things that you are experiencing could be a separate condition in its own right, or whether maybe they are explained as just part of your really unique profile of strengths and differences. Regardless of the sort of mix that you have, there seems to be reports of increased problems in other areas. So musculoskeletal problems, difficulties processing hormonal changes, so a more intense experience of things like menopause. You might see an increase in executive functioning difficulties compared to neurotypical peers. So those things that occur as you age seem to impact neurodivergent people slightly differently, and in addition to that, they will be treated slightly differently by those that are involved in their care because they're viewing it through a neurotypical lens. Please change. Okay, so I wanted to consider hormones, and for men, this is often less often talked about, but there is a real impact as testosterone starts to drop off. You can experience difficulty in some of the cognitive abilities, so the reports are around memory, spatial ability and executive functioning, but also if you think about the decrease in muscle mass, a decline in sensory receptors and coordination, then if your desired occupations or activities relate to being able to plan and execute a physical activity, that's going to be impacted. If you can't do what you want or need to do, how will you feel? How would it impact you if you can't carry out those occupations? In women, the decline of estrogen and the way that sort of regulates the messages go into the brain, dopamine and adrenaline, and supporting attention, supporting working memory, planning. That's going to have an impact on your executive functioning skills. And then, although there isn't a lot of research in relation to dyspraxia in the menopause and dyspraxia in ageing, we know that, again, that decline in sensory receptors, nerves, the brain processing, proprioception and vestibular differences as you age gets more difficult. So then if your balance and your ability to judge where you are in space is more challenged, for an individual who found that tricky to begin with, that can be quite a stressful process to go through. However, compared to other individuals who have never experienced that, you might actually be in a mentally stronger position to deal with those differences, because for some people, having worked on wards previously with older individuals, if there's a fall, that can be quite frightening. What if I fall again? Am I going to be safe? I've got to hold on to the banister, or this is going to happen. If you're used to falling, if that's your baseline or your normal, you're going to be less emotionally impacted by those later life falls because it's part of your norm. And I think that's one of the more positive elements of knowing this about yourself, of understanding that it's, I've always done this. This is my baseline. So yes, it can get worse over time, and also, as much as we've mentioned the estrogen's role and how that impacts women with autism or ADHD, similarly those receptors will also influence females who are dyspraxic, again, looks at things like alertness, attention, memory, emotional regulation. So all of those things are going to be more tricky as that period of change in life occurs. Please change. So I've just put a couple of statistics on here. And all the references are in the final few slides, which if anyone wants to take a picture of, that's absolutely fine. What I'm thinking is there was so many statistics to choose from, and there was so much information out there that I just I tried to think of the ones that might most impact, that would impact the most people, that would have the widest impact on most of us. 50% of individuals diagnosed as autistic with ADHD or Tourette's syndrome also exhibit joint hypermobility. That's compared to just 20% of the general population. And hypermobility in itself will elicit changes as you age. So you might, it depends on the subtype that you have, but if it's vascular, you're going to see certain differences. There might be musculoskeletal differences. So considering those co-occurring conditions, which we're already establishing are much more prevalent in individuals who are autistic, ADHD or have Tourette's, then that needs to be considered by your healthcare providers. This hypermobility is also linked to increased pain and symptoms such as dizziness upon standing, circulatory differences and musculoskeletal implications as we age. So I'm thinking of things like joint pain or postural drop. You know, some of you might have been told, you know, be careful if you stand up too quickly because you'll start to feel dizzy. So those sort of things, you know, will be impacted. The other highlight was that over 76% of women diagnosed with autism or ADHD in childhood reported chronic pain in adulthood. And we know that more disproportionately women experience chronic pain compared to men, but that there's been very little research done into that. This rate is approximately 3 times higher than similarly aged women in the general population. And over 90% of individuals with a diagnosis of ADHD report chronic pain as a baseline. And I just think that that's really interesting, that correlation that people maybe don't think about or talk about, and how would that present when you attended for services? What would healthcare professionals interpret that pain as? And would you be believed? Would it, you know, would you be presumed to be exaggerating? We know that people don't always understand our way of communicating pain and discomfort. Individuals diagnosed with dyspraxia or developmental coordination disorder could be 3 or 4 times more likely to be overweight, which can impact areas such as respiratory and cardiovascular functioning as they age. If we think about the barriers to engaging in fitness activities, in you know, maybe going to the gym or going for a run, and the fear of embarrassment or any, you know, making a fool of yourself if you fall over at one of these groups, you can see why maybe it would stop people from wanting to engage in those kinds of activities. And then finally, I wanted to highlight the fact that less than 1% of overall autism research is focused on older people. Less than 1%. So hopefully that's going to change. Hopefully we can push for more research, for more understanding, because we won't grow out of these sort of conditions. And although we are developing different coping strategies and our environment plays a huge role, people do need to develop an understanding of how we process our environment, how we process the world around us, and what impact that has. Please change. Okay, so thinking about that less than 1% of research that's done around older people, I wanted to think about the kind of assessments used and what people may think when they're carrying out assessments, how they might view the neurodivergent population. I searched and tried to find exclusions in these different tests, so things like the ACE or the MOCA or LACLs. I looked at them and I tried to find something in the literature that said this doesn't apply or treat it this way if the individual is autistic, has ADHD, is dyspraxic. I couldn't find anything of that nature in any of those manuals. And there's very little information about how to approach these kinds of diagnostic assessments with neurodivergent people from the search that I conducted. But if you think about it, being able to construct a 3D shape is going to be to do with things like spatial reasoning, you know, your motor skills. Is that necessarily going to be a direct result of being an older individual who's experiencing cognitive decline? Or could it be because throughout your life you found those sort of activities challenging because of the way that your brain processes information and because of the motor skills that you naturally have? So I think a lot of these tests are asking questions in a way that doesn't consider neurodivergent thinking and doesn't consider the variety of way that neurodivergent individuals will process information. I also thought about the frailty and fall risk. You know, people are measured on like quite a basic scale. You know, you're at risk of falls. We've done X scale or Y scale, but actually, if you have always fallen over and you have management techniques for this and you incorporate safety factors into your day-to-day life, is that still a cause for concern? I don't know. So yes, I think there's very little understanding around these areas, and even the language that's used. So for example, I don't know if anyone here has ever taken these kind of assessments or delivered them, but I recall there's areas in it where you are asked to remember an address at the beginning and then at the end. I had to reread it when I was delivering the assessment. I was thinking, hope no one asked me. And then there's another element where you're asked, which one of these is a marsupial? Which group do these go in? Can you name things rapidly, the animals rapidly? If your brain groups them together in a set way, how will that be interpreted? So if you, are writing a story and you go off on a tangent, is that going to be held against you, that you are not coherent, but actually you've always thought in a tangential way, going off onto new ideas and thinking of new things? So how are those results being interpreted? Please change. So I have added a little video here. It's only a few seconds long. If we could please play the video.
Okay. Watch me carefully. Bring the needle to the front of the leather. Push the needle through the next hole towards the back of the leather. Don't pull the lacing tight, but leave a small loop in it. Bring the lacing to the front of the leather. This time, put the needle through the loop you have made. Keep the needle to the left of the lacing and pull the lacing through the loop towards the back of the leather. Tighten the lacing from the back hole, then tighten the long lacing end. Make sure your lacing isn't twisted. Now do 3 more stitches.
The video was really brief, so it doesn't matter that it hasn't loaded. What is happening during the video is there is a leather lacing tool, a little bit like this. So I've made a bigger version so that we could see it today. And this leather lacing tool is used as part of an assessment process where we're looking to see an individual's ability to problem solve, to plan ahead, to correct mistakes, to communicate and reason, and also any of your sort of grip and motor skills. In this, we start with a running stitch, which is just sort of straight in, straight out. Most people would be able to carry out a running stitch. We then move on to a whip stitch, which is slightly more complicated. We give individuals a demonstration, and then we provide some prompting. After a certain point, you won't get any more prompting, any more demonstrations. And if you can't do that, you're not able to move on to this last section. The last section is the single cordovin stitch. Now, in the video, the demonstrator explains that the way that you pull it through, the way that you leave the back open, the way that that's then twisted and pulled through is all really important. So if someone can make the shape correctly so that it feeds around in this way, but hasn't done it in the correct way, you're losing points for that. Certain scores will often be equated within reports to a certain level of functioning. So for example, we might say someone who is at a level 4 maybe needs someone to check that they're taking their medication, to make sure that they're not spending too much money on things that they don't need. I would say level 4 is around here. You're not usually up to the single cordovin stitch, and if you are up to there, you're not doing it well. This was a struggle. I remember assessing people with this and practicing it myself before I went to their houses. I found it really tricky, and I don't think that that is a measure of my ability, or certainly not, academic ability or ability to function as I run a household and, have all the sort of appropriate qualifications that one might expect. What it was difficulty in executing this sort of fine motor skill, planning ahead, working out how it wanted to be pulled. I'd only been shown it twice, and I needed to do it a few times for my motor memory to sort of kick in and really grasp it. So I used to feel bad sort of delivering this and then writing up a report where I'm saying this individual, so where did I have, so it says, Close supervision to remove dangerous objects, to solve any problems occurring through minor changes in routine. Close supervision to remove objects out of the visual field. Changes in their environment may need to be monitored. Person may spend a daily allowance, walk to familiar locations in the neighbourhood, or follow a familiar simple bus route. How are those sort of deductions being drawn from this really complex stitch, which still now a little bit goosebumpy because I hated doing it. So but this is a standardised test. It's meant to be performance and evidence-based. It's associated with the cognitive disabilities model. So this is not just, you know, something that I found in an obscure, you know, oh, in the olden days we used to. This is held up as quite a good example of practice to show our reasoning and our sort of evidence base of why are we saying that this person needs a care package or support, when actually what we're asking them to do as a neurodivergent individual who has difficulties with, you know, spatial ability, proprioception, tactile input. How do I know how to judge to put it in this? This is a big example of it. It's usually a small leather piece. So if the leather's flapping and you're trying to get it through a small hole, but you've got proprioceptive difficulties because you're dyslexic, you have autism, you have ADHD, and you're really struggling to get it through the hole, you're losing marks. But you would be very capable to budget for your household, or very capable to adapt to maybe a change that you've adapted to previously and could apply those changes too. So this in particular, I think it was important, even though it took me a while to do it. I hope everyone appreciates that I actually did that cut over and stitch for you all so you could see it. But it took me a while to do, but I wanted to show you the neurotypical lens in which many of these assessments are being viewed in, and how it's important then that we can advocate for ourselves and say, actually, that's not going to be an appropriate assessment for me because I have X, Y, and Z. Or, you know, I know that you're going to use this sort of language assessment as part of my cognitive profile. However, please consider the fact that I'm autistic and process language differently. Yeah.
Do you feel that that is actually a reasonable tool to measure a neurotypical person's ability? Because I don't understand how they got from that to, you know, I'm not an OT.
Yes, so without having the full manual in front of me, they do give rationale. They have done lots of tests associated with it, and there does seem to be links between sort of cognitive ability, the ability to plan, to correct messages. You know, if someone keeps making the same error, then we might say, well, you know, they're having difficulty recognising mistakes, modifying action. But then... Yeah, and that is it. So if you're being held to certain measures that would be difficult for you to complete at 20, is that then a sign of cognitive decline or physical decline at 50, 60, 70, 80? I don't think it is, because you'd have, oh, that's your baseline. And I think that's what I'm hoping that people get from today, is that understanding your baseline allows you to better advocate for yourself as you age. This was always, I've always gone off on a tangent. I'm always talking, and then it's like the red string in a detective movie. I'm going, oh, I've just thought of this, I've just thought of that. And I'm always finding that happens. But if someone assessed me, they might say, she's very tangential in speech. She can't keep to one sort of topic for a long period of time. She must be, you know, declining.
That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah, and it should always come from a presumption of competence. It should always be, I believe you can do this, until you tell me that you're having extreme difficulties, and even then, it's case by case. So just because you find in one area difficulty doesn't mean that you're not competent to carry out decisions in other areas.
Exactly. Social care go that way of, well, you can't do this, you can't do this. Wait to see when I have my evaluation now.
Yes. Good luck to them. So yes, even though the short video didn't play, I think we've all sort of really understood a really visual example of how these difficulties can be interpreted, maybe through a really neurotypical lens, and doesn't consider any of our needs and differences. So Elliot, please change. Thank you. So I've listed a few examples of different communication modifications, providing alternative formats, and I think I've already skipped ahead and mentioned the sort of tangential speech. But I think what else is quite important, and that comes up often, is that often there will be a view of health professionals being sort of in a real position of power, and individuals might be used to masking, to fawning, to people pleasing, and maybe give the answers that someone wants. So how do we make people feel safe to tell us their truth, the reality of what they're experiencing? Also, how do we understand how people are communicating their needs in a different way? If someone keeps saying, I don't know, what other questions could we ask? How can we rephrase that so that they feel better able to answer those questions? You know, is there another way that we can do things? Do people need videos of instructions rather than pamphlets? How do we communicate in a way that makes sense to the people that we are working for, to support, working with? So I think that's quite important going forward, and also understanding that the communication is going to be different. If someone asks you a lot of clarifying questions, that is not them challenging your authority or trying to be argumentative or any of those sort of misconceptions. It is, I need to know why you're saying the things that you're saying. I need to know that I've not misunderstood you. I can't repeat this later when I get home if I've got it wrong, because I can only retell correct information. So all of those considerations about the way that someone communicates with you, how are they being interpreted by other people? And these are very small, reasonable adjustments. These are not cost heavy on any sort of institution or organisation. These are minor things that training, I believe, you know, would help those healthcare professionals to be able to carry out. Please change, Elliot. Thank you. So I mentioned being able to explain your experiences. I don't know who has ever done a Likert scale where it's, you know, 1 to 10, how do you feel out of this? Or, you know, happy face, sad face, how do you feel about this? Tell me about your pain. I think that is really tricky if you're neurodivergent. What are we comparing it to? What is your 10? Is your 10 like a tattoo? Was the tattoo on your shoulder? Because I had one on my stomach and one here, and that one felt different than that one. So what are we talking about here? So it's that abstract thought. It's, you know, thinking about imagining someone else's experience. That's going to be tricky as well. And also, often I find the options are really similar. So you'll have 1 to 10. I've sort of shortened my version there, but you'll have 1 to 10, and maybe 4, 5, and 6 are really close together, really similar. And I don't know which one to pick. I don't know which. I want to explain it in a way that I understand. So moving forward, again, thinking about your baseline, would you say, for me, a 10 or a 6 or whatever you want to use, whatever scale you want to use, is I can't eat properly, I can't sleep properly, I don't want to watch reruns of Game of Thrones because it is so bad, I can't do anything I would normally do. And then you've got a way of explaining, this is my 10 or my 5 or whatever scale you want to use. And, you know, or my 3 is, you know, it's like having a stone in my shoe, like I'm aware of it and it's bugging me, but I can do the things I want or need to do. That being said, if I had a stone in my shoe, I couldn't carry on. So I think having those sort of proper examples to give is helpful, but we can only really do that if we've got them before these events occur. You can't ask someone in the moment when you're in distress, please explain yourself, you know, carefully how you're feeling now, because in that moment you're too dysregulated to do it. So again, having that baseline, having the way that you communicate pain written down is really helpful. And I also, let me just check if this is the right slide. Also thought about other difficulties, so things like alexithymia, introception, this sort of double empathy problem. So all these ideas around how we communicate and how we process and interpret information. So can you recognise actually what is going on in your body, and do you need to change that? So when I've taken my daughter to the hospital, I'll say, do you feel bad? And she looks at me and I'll say, does your belly feel bubbly? Does it feel hot? Are you getting pressure under your chest? And I'll ask her very specific questions, because the vague language that's used she doesn't know how to answer those sort of questions. Or maybe you think that you're explaining one thing and they're interpreting it a different way. You think you're being very clear and they're, you know, really interpreting you totally different. So you get to the end, or you may have seen your medical notes and thought, I never said that, you know, that's not what I was trying to communicate. So I think that those sort of things are important, and also how you communicate that. If you arrive at an A&E department and you are quite straight-faced, you don't want to draw attention to yourself, you're, you know, stoic and trying to sort of hold it all inside, they might think you're not in a lot of pain, you're not crying, you're not screaming, you're not behaving in a way that would communicate that you're in pain, but actually you are extremely troubled by what's going on, but you're not showing that in a way that they understand. So I think all of those things, again, are helpful for us to consider. Please change, thank you. So self-advocacy, that can be really hard. It can be hard for us to speak up for ourselves. It can be hard to be believed, to communicate in a way, again, that isn't interpreted as being challenging or I don't know if anyone's had any experience with that. So it's that kind of, how do I communicate what I need? Is it reasonable that I can access the things that I'm asking for? Because in an ideal world, we would all hope to have all the reasonable adjustments that we would need, but are they actually available to us in our area? Can people meet our needs? And be aware of your guidelines, any rights, any policies that are in your area. As I've mentioned before about the geographic implication, you might have some things available to you in England that aren't available in Wales. So make sure that you've got the right information for where you are. And if you do need to write things down, have an advocate, you know, make sure that you've got a chaperone, whatever it is that you feel that you need. Don't be embarrassed to ask for these things. You're entitled to them, and they are reasonable adjustments. So I think having some sort of plan for how you will communicate those things is helpful. Do you have to practice it? Could you sort of phone a friend and say, I want to do this, can you be the other person because I'm nervous about how the conversation will go? That, all of that is absolutely fine. It's whatever you need to do. Please change. So I've put the sensory hierarchy of learning on here. It covers all the sort of hidden senses at the bottom. So you've got interoception, proprioception, and vestibular input. So for anyone who's not heard me go on about this before, those kind of senses really are the foundation for everything else. So if your proprioception is off, you don't know where your body is in space, you might knock into things, you might push things too hard, you might feel unable to sleep unless you've got weight over you. As a child, you might have covered your bed in teddies or needed a parent to sleep next to you or keep a hand on you. You might have broke pencils, you might have needed to do a lot of jumping, running, climbing. Vestibular differences, you might say, I don't like using an escalator, I've got to look at my feet on it. I don't like having my hair tipped back in the hairdressers, or going over the car in sort of a big bump, or I absolutely love spinning, swinging. If I'm talking, you're going to see me like swaying from side to side, and any of those things are going to be dependent on how your nervous system works. And then your interoception is hunger, thirst, pain, temperature regulation, and emotional understanding. How do I feel in my body? If those things aren't there, how can you then build all the way up? How can we get to those higher level activities of daily living, behaviour, and sort of those like actualization? How can I reach my potential? So if I give a really brief example, if you think about, say you're writing your memoirs with a lovely fountain pen or something, and I don't know why I've gone back to like Victorian times, but say you are writing your memoirs, and in order to do that successfully, you're going to have correct posture to be able to sit at the chair. You're going to need core strength, you're going to need stability of your wrist, of your shoulder, you're going to need to be able to know how much pressure to apply to not break the nib, not spill the ink, and judge whether or not you're going to complete the sentence on that line, or should I stop writing here and move to the next one because it won't fit. So all of that kind of planning and organisation is based on all of the information that's coming through your body, through those sensory receptors, being interpreted and then actualised by you. So when we say that those messages impact everything, I truly believe that they do, because they're all the messages that your body uses to decide how to interact with your environment. As you get older, they might change in some ways. There is a decline in some receptors. You can become more sensitive in other ways. So, for example, people who have a diagnosis, of dementia often report an increase in tactile sensitivity. But people need to understand, were you always tactile sensitive, or are they looking at your tactile sensitivity and going, oh, we often see this in dementia. Also, the activities that you might have done, so we've got people sort of on a scooter and on a swing, you might think, I can't really get away with skateboarding now. That was always my thing, but should I do it? What about broken bones, etc. So what other ways can you find to meet your sensory needs? What can you do at home? What can you do in your community that allows you to meet those needs, to be regulated, to achieve the things that you want to do as you age? That's really important. We can't just give up on the things that make us who we are. Please change, thank you. So then I thought about interaction. So quality of life tools, I don't know if anyone is familiar with those, but you often see them in places like care homes or wards where there's older individuals or people who might be at risk of experiencing poor quality of life. But one of the things that they focus on is how much interaction you're having with other people on the ward or other people in that environment. Now, if you don't like being part of a big group anyway, if you don't want to do bingo with Ethel because she always shouts out even if she hasn't won, and the room has got hard chairs and it smells of the food that was cooked there yesterday, how is that used as a measure of saying whether or not you're social or that you've got good quality of life? What you're doing is avoiding a negative social interaction, a negative sensory experience. And your idea of wonderful social interaction might be painting Warhammer figures or organising your RAF planes or rereading books, and you might want to talk about those online in a forum and enjoy it that way, and enjoy speaking to people about shared interests and any sort of one-on-one interactions that might give you a lot of joy. But it's about, again, understanding your baseline. What is good social interaction for you? What does that look like when you're well? And if you're not well, if you're burnt out, if you're feeling exhausted or unwell, again, what does that look like? Because then that helps people to understand how you might be processing that. I think it goes back again to understanding how you process both social information and sensory information. So understanding that will help other people understand what a good quality of life looks like to you. Please change, Elliot. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. For me, I think this is important, and some people can find it a little bit awkward, but actually it's a big part of our lives. Sex and relationships are meaningful occupations. We have a right to a family under human rights legislation. All of that sort of is really important to well-being. And I think that lots of neurodivergent individuals will have a more open-minded view of what that might look like. And while some people are absolutely very clear that they have very traditional views and feel very sort of rule-bound, or it relates to other values that they have, there are individuals who are quite happy to explore different areas and different ideals around sex, gender and sexuality. So whatever those views are, it's really important that you maintain them and who you are as you age. How do you maintain intimacy, closeness? Is it hand-holding? Is it going to certain places? Is it other things, like whatever it is that you want to do to feel connected to someone in the way that makes you feel good? Carrying those things on as you age is really important. It makes a big difference to us, but you might need to adapt. So be sensory smart. Do you need to change the, for example, if you were using any sort of materials and they were too rough on skin that was starting to weaken, you would have to adapt those. If you were engaged in certain positions and you had to consider arthritis, hypermobile injuries, that sort of thing, you need to be aware of those things. Don't let them stop you from doing the things you want or need to do. But also be aware of the higher rates of abuse and exploitation that neurodivergent people often experience. So I know that women who are screened positive for autism traits are 3 times as likely to experience sexual abuse as those who do not. 3 times is really high. And there was other statistics around women who have an ADHD diagnosis and sort of intimate abuse. And I just on reading those, I thought the understanding that we have as we age, does that understanding over time really protect us, or are we still vulnerable as we age? And that needs to be a consideration, that just because you're older doesn't necessarily mean that you will be able to spot these individuals who might cause you harm. So yeah, be aware of exploitation, take financial advice where necessary, look after yourselves, and a bit Jerry Springer and each other. So then, Elliot, next one, please. Your sense of identity, how has that changed from when you were 20? How did you view yourself? How did other people view you? Were you someone who, you know, always went out dancing and drinking and you know, were like the life and soul of the party? Were you very responsible? Were you very academic? What did you want to do? What did you how did you view yourself during those times? And how has that changed as you've got older? So if we think about the way that maybe you have outgrown certain activities or continued to enjoy those, and other people's views on them. So other people might say, oh, you shouldn't still be playing with Lego. Actually, that's not the case. There's no upper limit. It says from like 3 upwards for choking. And then you can go as high as you like. So those sort of ideas, or, you know, or you shouldn't still be having problems with this now. You're 35, you know, you shouldn't be doing this now. Actually, the way my body processes information, I will always find this challenging. I'm not going to magically sort of grow out of this difference or suddenly lose particular strengths. So I think understanding how other people see you and how you see yourself is important, you know, and so that you can communicate. Yes, you might expect me to do X, but actually I need you to appreciate who I am holistically as a whole person. These are my interests. This is what makes me me. This is what makes me special, and to sort of respect it and understand that. And with the passing of time, your body structure and function is going to change. So as we discussed before, those sort of hormone production is going to change, muscle mass is going to change, metabolic rate is going to change. So again, does that impact how you see yourself? And does that impact you sort of your ability to engage in the things you want or need to do? Sort of bringing it back to occupation again. If you feel less able to do those things, does that make you feel any particular way? You know, I'm not myself if I can't, that kind of thing. Next one, please, Elliot. Thank you. So, yeah, staying occupied. That little joyous cartoon me is because the Funko Pop near to it is a Funko Pop that I had generated based on some various images that I created. I collect Funko Pops. Not a great deal, only ones that are really important to me, like She-Ra, things from my childhood that like really mean something to me. And yes, absolutely, I imagine people might think, why are you collecting those at your age? But they make me happy, and it's really important to find joy in life. That balance is particularly important. When we think about rest and restoration for neurodivergent people, it's not just about sitting down. Your rest and restoration might be I'm going to reorganise my kitchen drawer. This is going to bring me peace. This is going to make me feel good. It really might not for many people, but you know, whatever whatever that is, whatever that activity is, it doesn't need to be I'm going to have a bubble bath or I'm going to sit by a candle. It can be something that actually is important to you, taps into your interests, makes you feel good. So whatever that is, that's what's important to do, not what other people would suggest. So self-determined interests have a positive impact on well-being. When you might have health professionals say, oh, go for a walk, have a bath, read a book, these things will make, you know, these are the cookie cutter things that we think will make you feel better. Actually, do they make you feel better? What's your list of things that make you feel better, and do those things instead? Being meaningfully occupied as you age is really important. And again, it's not about what you're allowed to do. Who says that you stop playing video games at a certain age? Why is that a less respected activity than going for a run? Who's made this up? Because it should be self-determined. That's what, you know, what sort of supports us as we get older. Okay, please can we change, Elliot? Thank you. So we're coming to the end now. I know I've talked for a really long period of time. I've said a lot. But I wanted to just briefly touch on the idea of grief, and that, you know, sometimes there can be concern over this really atypical response. This person is really struggling with the idea of grief, or this person doesn't seem to be struggling at all, and we're concerned. And actually, there's no one way to process that kind of change in life. You know, across culture, across time, rituals were different. The way that people were buried was different. The way that mourning periods occurred was different. Again, throughout time, throughout history, and all across different cultures. So why, again, have we decided now that there's one way to experience this human experience? And also, it doesn't necessarily, if we think about alexithymia and sort of the masking elements that we've talked about, communication differences, it doesn't necessarily mean what you're seeing is that person's experience, is what they're feeling. So again, it's holding back on judgment, and if other people are making judgments about you or a family member because of your response, you know, trying to make them aware that actually just because you can see this doesn't mean that this is actually what's happening for that individual, or that it's wrong. Next one, please, Elliot. So care and considerations, be prepared, get your baseline ready, try and communicate that to people. What do they need to know? Who do you want to share that information with? Do you want it prepared digitally? Do you want it shared in a binder? Do you want your GP to know but not your mental health care coordinator? Do you want your children to have a copy? Who should have access to these things, and what should it look like for you? And again, put that together before any key changes have taken place, because once you are on a pathway or becoming you know, involved in services, it can be more tricky to prove, not that you would need to prove, but to prove that was your baseline. Next one, please, Elliot. So I've put together a booklet. They're available at the back if anyone would like to have a look or to purchase one, and it has what we've talked about in them today. But equally, you could make one online. You could make one, you can download files and sort of sample pages from various different organisations for free. So there's lots of different options for you to put together some sort of baseline available. Next one, please. So the last slide is about these at-a-glance considerations, thinking about what we've talked about, that bodily structure and function is going to change, your environment is going to change, your neurotype won't, but it is going to be impacted by all of those other things. So yes, you will always remain ADHD, autistic, ADHD, or dyspraxic, but all of those things around you will impact you. Know what support is available, be able to advocate for your physical, emotional, sensory, financial needs. You know, are the benefits that you can apply for? Is there help that you can get? Is there an advocate service that you can use? Care really should be person-centred. We hear that all the time, person-centred care, holistic care. Really understand the impact of co-occurring conditions, adapt goals, adapt assessments, and recognise a neurodivergent baseline and how that's different. and stay occupied. So be able to do what you want or need to do is really linked to improve well-being. So try and do those things that are important to you, and it will keep you well for longer. I don't know if we're going to have a break and then come back for questions. Is that okay?
Can I thank Jacqui for, once again, an amazing presentation.